Just had another, excuse me, thought regarding things that we did in high school. You boys have all grown up with ballpoint pens, but back in the middle to late 40s and earlier, we didn't have anything like ballpoint pens. What we had was pens that you filled with ink. And even earlier than that, back in the 30s and before that, remember seeing or hearing about inkwells, a hole in the desk for an inkwell to be put in so a person could fill his pen with ink and stick the girl's pigtails who was sitting in front of you into the inkwell. Well, there was in fact it was the son-in-law of the Kenmore school system superintendent, who was a long-time science teacher. I think he taught biology. And he enjoyed his position, even to a point where doing experiments or cutting up frogs or things like that, he used to love to wear a white coat. Well, you could probably see what's coming. The white coat that he wore over his, I think he probably took his suit coat off, but over his shirt tie, he would, to make his point, walk up and down the aisles. Well, it didn't take long for somebody to figure out that if you took a pen and as he walked by your desk, if you took the pen and raised it above your head and threw it down, not on the floor, but just made the motions of throwing it down, that the ink would come out on this man's white coat. And at the end of the day, I think he wore the white coat, maybe not because of his position in the educational community, but maybe to protect his shirt, because at the end of the day, his shirt would have multiple blue and or black stripes going all the way down his white coat. Nothing malicious, just a fun and games type of thing that I thought of and thought I'd interject here before I went on. Well, Larry Coon, I will have to admit that you were right in suggesting that I leave some space at the end of each one of the tapes, because I've thought of things since, but here I am, I'm still in high school, and thought I'd bring you up to speed on some of the screwy things that I did. One thing I do recall is that I think I was a sophomore, and I was invited by a nice lady, or maybe I invited her, I can't recall, to a hayride over on Grand Island, and the horses and the hay and the wagon and blankets, because it's in the fall and it's cool. And I don't think it was my reputation, but I think it was her virginity and all the other stuff that she was trying to protect, because she brought along a flashlight. I think she had it in her pocket or something like that. She had a flashlight, and she had a dictionary. And we're under the blanket, and I'd just as soon play a little kissy face and so on. But anyhow, she turned on the flashlight and said, "Now, why don't we just look in the dictionary here and check out various words?" So we spent the whole evening over there on Grand Island reading the dictionary. Somewhat frustrating, but nevertheless, that's the way it went. And I think, remember the high school group that I told you about? Once a year during the summer, we would rent a cottage up at Shirkston. And they had a big dance hall there, and I don't know whether they had an orchestra or just a record player or whatever. I think it was probably an orchestra because it cost us a quarter or something to get in. But anyhow, we rented this cottage, and as we progressed doing silly high school boys type of things, we'd bump into the furniture and we'd bump into the walls, and we'd do this, that, and the other thing to just to have fun and chase the girls down the beach. I didn't do anything that I shouldn't have done, but I do recall that while we were there, I don't believe it was my idea, but anyhow, Spencer Bush, who subsequently joined Rotary, owned the Bush Floor Company. He and I talked about, or the whole group talked about, having chicken dinner. Well, we're right close by to some farmers. So he and I guess I'm probably lucky to be alive, he and I went along with him. So we went over to the farm, we jumped over the fence and went into the hen house and grabbed a chicken. I can't remember who grabbed it, whether Bush did or I did. Ran like hell as the farmer came out of his house, turned the lights on, and I'm very, very fortunate, or you're very fortunate, because you wouldn't have been around if he had had a shotgun. But we took the chicken home and cooked it. It was kind of a scrawny thing, but just screwy adventures. And anytime a group of fellas rents a cottage up there, the owner or his assistant would come around and check on Saturday morning before we left to make sure everything was okay. So we had various people standing in various locations. I think one standing in front probably of a hole in the wall. I know the casing around one of the doors was either ripped off and broken. So that was my job. I had to stand in front just like a disinterested party, just standing there and inviting the man in and letting him walk around and look and everything. I'm sure after we left, he probably found the broken. I think it had just either came off or knocked off and split down the middle, so it wasn't something we had to replace, but it was sure damaged and hidden from his view when he inspected. And as 18-year-olds will do, Rick would get his dad's or his brother's car. His brother was, Jack was a little bit older, and he had hot rod. There was one time, I think my dad had a Plymouth or a DeSoto or a Dodge, or one of the three anyhow, because that's what his favorite, Chrysler was his favorite product. And Rick and I ended up, with me driving, going down Millersport, and I don't remember what the speedometer read, but it was one hell of a lot higher than it should have been. And another occasion where I could have been my demise. Well, both of us. And on another occasion, I think we started. Rick kept bragging about his brother's car, and it was a stick shift, and Dad's was a automatic transmission, and he can beat me, and I can beat him, and all that sort of thing. And I think we started on Elmwood Avenue, down near Nocky Road, right where the two cemeteries are on either side. And I think he had some people in his car, and I had some people in mine, and we raced up Elmwood Avenue towards Sheridan, where there's a curve there in the road. We didn't bump any fenders, and I don't think, I'm not sure who won the race, and maybe it was a tie. But again, screwy things that 15, 16, 17-year-olds do. I'm absolutely positive that none of the three of you would have done anything like that. Rick and I seemed to connect, and it was probably he was he was probably sitting in front of me in homeroom, because homerooms were by last name. So we made a good connection, even though he was a year older than I. And of course, the reason he didn't graduate in 47, but in January of 48, was because he took an earth science course and flunked it in his senior year, because he didn't pay any attention to it. And so he graduated in 48, really. January of 48, and I in June of 48. But on one occasion, he and I had double dated. We were in the car. Rick, as I think I've told the story before, didn't drink. And I don't know as I had anything or much to drink, but my date and I were in the back seat, and Rick and his date were in the front, and he came down, which was Commonwealth, from Kenmore Avenue, and he was going to take me home, forgetting or not recognizing the fact that Commonwealth didn't go through Lincoln Park. So we were driving along. I had a fairly good clip, and we came to, oh golly, I'm not sure what the name of the road was, but it was the last road perpendicular to Commonwealth on the south side of Lincoln Park. And all of a sudden he realized that there wasn't any road ahead, couldn't stop. The front of the car dipped down into the ditch, and everything stopped. Well, we kidded and joked about it, because it was his father's car, and his father had a bowling ball in the back. Well, you can imagine with a sudden stop like that, where the front of the car goes down in a ditch and all of a sudden things stop. Bodies and bowling balls and everything else. I had a lump on the top of our side of my head when the bowling ball hit me in the head, because it was bouncing around the same way the two bodies in the back and the two bodies in the front were. Crazy experience. And then another experience that I had, and you may remember the name, Bill Singleton, married she was younger than I, Joan Gluntz. It was Joan and Bill Singleton subsequently. And she had asked me to go to a dance, a formal. I think I was probably a junior or senior. Well, anyhow, that Saturday afternoon, after I had said yes, I'm sitting at one of our fraternity brothers' houses, and we're sitting there jawing, and all of a sudden somebody said, well, geez, I'm going to do this tonight. And I said, well, geez, I got to go to this dance. And I can't blame anybody else. I picked up the phone, I called Joan, and said, I'm broke, and I can't make it tonight. Well, I think this was on a Saturday morning. Well, there was a lot of tears and whatever have you. When I finally came to my senses, I called her back and said, geez, I will go. Well, no, I'm sorry. Oh, her mother wouldn't let me talk to her, because she was crying and everything else. She had already called a mutual friend of ours, Jim Nist. This was the pilot for United, I think, that we had met in high school, after high school, the Union, Pittsburgh. She had called Jim, and Jim said, sure, he'd take her. Well, when my parents found out about that, I can't remember now what the punishment was, but I think it was severe. I was probably grounded for I don't know how long for pulling a stunt like that. And I don't imagine that my friends thought very much of me for doing that either. But these are crazy things that the old man did. After some time, I was on the phone trying to reach Bill Singleton to talk to him about life insurance. And I could hear some conversation in the background. And I think it went something to the effect, I don't want to even see the guy. No, and if you ever bought any insurance from him, I'd divorce you. So that was additional punishment, and deservedly so. Should have never done anything like that. Well, as I've mentioned, Previously, I was not an exemplary student, and I can't recall, I think I may have mentioned this before, I can't recall, somebody was applying to Bowling Green, and it never even crossed my mind to apply to some of the local schools, but I wrote for an application, filled it out, sent it in, and was accepted. And this was at a time when a lot of vets were coming back and allowed to go to college under the GI Bill. And I think that summer before I went to college, I was working at the hot dog stand and the custard stand there locally, here locally. So come September, or end of August I guess it was, no, I don't think we started then until after Labor Day. So on a weekend, Mom and Dad piled me and some clothes and in the car, and off we went west towards Bowling Green. Well, Mom, being the brilliant person that she was, even though she had never been to college, recognized the fact that chances are any dormitory was going to look like what you guys found in September or August when you got there. Well, anyhow, she brought some old clothes, she brought some buckets, some brushes, dust cloths, rags, mop, which I never paid any attention to. And when we got there and checked in, found out that I had been assigned to a room on the second or third floor of what was commonly referred to as the North Dorm. The North Dorm was one of those buildings that was hastily constructed because at Bowling Green, it being flat farmland, had a what they called a V5, Victor 5 program, where they had young men that needed to be housed and were housed in this, as I say, hastily constructed North Dorm. And it had rooms that were probably 10 by 10, where they were training to become pilots at some local airfield, and that's where they lived. And so here was this large 3 or 4 story almost prefabricated building that would be ideal for housing incoming freshmen. Well, we traveled along Route 5 and 20 because that was the only routes then. There was no throughways, and went through every little town. And even though I think it was 300 miles, maybe 150 miles to Cleveland and another 150 miles to Bowling Green, and traveling at anywhere from 40 to 50 miles per hour average, it probably took us 7 or 8 hours to get there. And so when we got there, checked in, was assigned to North Dorm, out we went. Didn't look very appealing, but at that time, you know, I wasn't looking for a brick or stone mansion to live in. And up we went to the whatever floor and the assigned room. And of course it was dusty and dirty, and God bless Mom, because she brought all this cleaning equipment along. I think I was probably I may have been the first one there, and I may not have, but she cleaned the room up beautifully. I think it had three bunks that were there from the V5 program. There was 3 in a room. I think there was a desk. I think there were 3 desks, 3 bunks, and some closet space that we shared. And Mom cleaned up that room beautifully. I had as a roommate, and I can't recall his name right now, But here's a 18-year-old kid that's wet behind the ears, and here's a 21-year-old veteran from World War II that under the GI Bill was able to come back to go to college, not only have reasonable tuition and part of it paid for because of his military service, but also I think got a check once a month to help pay for extras. He was very instrumental in bringing me from an 18-year-old kid who had never been away from home other than living on the farm for a couple of years into reality. Our third roommate showed up. It was a nice enough young man. It was he lived either in Dayton or Cincinnati, as I recall. I think it was Cincinnati. But he was in love. He was in love with his high school sweetheart. And he moved in, and I can't recall whether I was on the single bunk or on the top or bottom of the doubles. But he cried every night. He would play either a tape or tune into Cincinnati or Dayton radio station, and he played Moon River over and over and over again. He may have had a record player and played Moon River, and he may have tuned into the radio station at home, but he would cry himself to sleep every night because he was away from his sweetheart. So I didn't hang around with him too much because of all that, and attached myself more to the 21-year-old. It was rather an uneventful year. Get up, go to class. The only problem was that wanting to be a veterinarian, erroneously, between physics and chemistry and biology and English and all that sort of thing, I don't think I ended up with, I probably was below a 2-point, I would suspect, because we had tons of labs and everything else, and not knowing any different, I signed up for 18 hours the first year, which was a little bit crazy in itself. Right, Brian? I think while Mom was cleaning up the room and whatever help I could give her, I think Dad was off in the car riding around the campus looking at all the good stuff. And excuse me for not remembering this exactly, but I think somebody said you ought to sign up for ROTC, Reserve Officers Training Corps. And I did. Now, whether I signed up as a freshman or as a sophomore or as a junior, I don't know. But again, that work ethic of Mom's she instilled in me, and they said, we'll pay you $1 a day, or $30 a month average. And I think that didn't occur until my junior and senior year. But $30 a month wasn't too bad, because, and I have to admit now that I have no idea what Mom and Dad paid for tuition, room, and board. I do know, as I said previously, that the out-of-state tuition was $37.50 a semester, or $75 a year, and I know my board was $1 a day for 3 squares and a couple meals on Saturday and Sunday, as I recall. And what the tuition and/or room was, I don't recall, and I don't know as I ever asked. And I'm sure the folks assumed that because my room and board, they were paying my room and board, the spending money that I got during that, number of years, Dad would send me $5 every 2 weeks. I very much anticipated that letter arriving in the mailbox, because you can well imagine just toothpaste or anything along that line. Personal needs soap ended up to more than $5 every 2 weeks. So we went to dances and we went to the show and we did things other than going to class. I think I tried. I think I tried my best, but didn't succeed too well. And I think I told you the story about the dean calling me in and saying, "Hey, change your major or go on home and go to work at Chevy." I would imagine that they probably had laundromats there in town, but here was this wet behind the ears 18-year-old that had no idea what laundry was or how it was washed or folded or anything else. And I think I know there was a box about the size of a small suitcase that you could pack your dirty laundry in, take it down to the mailbox, and send it home for a very, very nominal fee. I guess it was probably cheaper to send it home, have Mom do my laundry, stick it in the box, send it back to me, than it would have been to have me do it in a laundromat. But I don't know as I ever even checked out a laundromat. It was just the thing that everybody did. They sent their laundry home and had Mom do it and send it back, and everything was hunky-dory. At this stage of my life, I really wasn't very domesticated. Probably still not. I'll try to interject so this doesn't become boring, or as boring as it could be. I'll try to inject some screwy stuff and crazy expressions and things that happened and along the way to give you a few laughs anyhow. But getting back to ROTC, yeah, $30 a month seemed like a heck of a good thing. And this was right in the middle of the Korean War in the 50s. I actually, if I had a reasonable point average, anything either slightly under or slightly over a 2-point, it was probably because of ROTC, which I excelled at. I really did. I enjoyed the military. I think, as I told you before, as a kid playing out in the boonies all by myself and with a few other people during the Second World War, we played soldier. I had an affinity, I guess, for the military, which I'll talk about more later. But I think I got A's in military science, which, as I say, helped bring my grade average up, along with the $30 a month. My mother taught me well. If there was $1 on the table, go and get it. I think Bowling Green was probably a ideal place for the men who were in the V5 program to train, because it was flat. I mean flat. You could look for, it was like Kansas. And of course that allowed the snow to blow big time. So Bowling Green was probably a lot like, Don and Larry, you'll understand this, like Oswego. The snow really blew and piled, and but they kept it pretty well cleaned up, and we had no problem. Weren't that far away. And I do believe, and I don't think the Dean of Students prompted me to do this, but when I finished my freshman year and came back home to spend the summer months, I think it was then that I applied to Chevrolet for a job during the summer. And it was an experience. And as I look back on it now, I feel sorry for the folks then, and I feel sorry for them now. Going to work every day and doing the same thing over and over and over again. And to relieve the monotony of that, although I was paid well, I had to join the union, and they extracted X number of dollars from my pay. Had to be there like at 7 o'clock in the morning and got through at 3:30 or 4 or something along that line. And many times, because of the heat, and obviously it wasn't air conditioned, I was tired. By the time I got home, Mom was still visiting her mother and Dad was at work. So I'd go upstairs and flop down and fall asleep for a couple hours till dinner time. One of the reasons that I never was enthralled with the idea of buying a General Motors product or Chevrolet was because one of the jobs that I had as an employee of Chevrolet Tonawanda, and there were a number of high school, well, college kids working there during the summer, but the old timers would love to play games with the new kids, and the boss, the foreman, gave me a job of being on the line, and as these Chevrolet heads would come through, it was my job to take a grinder, stick it down into the head, and grind out the base of the seat for the pistons. If the pistons weren't seated properly, there was air that could get through there, other oil or gas or who knows what. And the men on the line used to get a big kick out of it because here I was conscientiously trying to do my job and grind every seat of every head, and the line would back up. The guys in front of me would, because I was inefficient and didn't know what the hell I was doing, I'd be grinding away, and the guys in front of me would move back from the line because I'm still working, and they had done their job, and were sitting back and chuckling and laughing and whatever have you, until a very gracious person came up to me and said, "Kid, you're not doing it as fast as you should, but let me tell you, one of the ways you could do it and speed up your production is to just do every other one." Well, that's what I did. I did every other one. Now, though I'm sure there was an awful lot of people in the early 50s that bought Chevrolet motors that probably took them back to the dealer and said, there's something wrong with the motor. And I think I resolved in my own mind that I was never going to buy a Chevrolet, because there were probably idiots like me working on the line that weren't doing all that they could or should do. But I'm sure that existed in all the automotive manufacturers' plants. And anybody who works for 8 hours on a job that they have to do over and over and over again, probably number one, drives them crazy, and they have to find some diversion in order to keep their sanity. Well, the diversion at the Chevrolet Tonawanda plant was, as I'm sure it was other places, there was a few jokesters that had cans of paint, and if they had to mark certain heads or different parts of the thing with yellow paint. Well, as the theory goes, if you can sneak up behind somebody who is taking a nap or a snooze or a rest or whatever have you, and paint the back of their heels with this yellow paint on a brush, that it would, as they walked around the plant and went to the bathroom or went to here, there, or the other place, if you saw somebody walking along with paint, with yellow paint on the back of their heels, it was an indication that they had been caught sleeping, or at least unaware of what was going on around them, that they'd just taken a snooze. So that was the joy of the hourly line workers at Chevrolet, is to find somebody that they could put paint on the back of their heels, and then everybody, as they walked around the plant, would get a chuckle knowing that they had gotten caught resting, sleeping, or whatever it may have been. Now that's pretty much what happened during the summer of '49. And probably during the summer when I wasn't working or napping, or go out in the evening and go suck up a few beers and chase a few girls and have some dates and do this, that, and the other thing. Go to Brinson's on Colvin and Sheridan, eat some hot dogs and play some kissy face. And I believe that I know that a friend of my dad's that he worked with, when Dad told him and others at Spencer Kellogg that his son was a freshman at Bowling Green, this man said, when I went to college, I joined a fraternity, and I joined a fraternity of SAE, and as a compliment to my father, this man said, if your son is half the guy that you are, I would be happy to introduce him to the Ohio Kappa chapter of SAE at Bowling Green. So in fact, this man, and I don't recall his name either, wrote a letter and said, hey, go look up this guy, Coon. He's out in the North Dorm, but he's a nice young lad, and if he's anything like his father, he'd be a credit to the organization. Well, when they had rushing, I was rushed by SAE, and I don't know, one or two, I don't know, I don't remember how many, but it was almost a foregone conclusion that I was going to join this fraternity, and I did. This is where I first, as part of my pledge class, met Larry Ward and a man by the name of Joe Danella. And we'll talk more about him later, Don. Joe Danella was also a 21-year-old, had been around. He was from Buffalo, ugly as sin, and had a, well, I don't have to be, he had a perpetual hard-on. He was in the military and spent time in the Second World War in Europe, and either succeeded or attempted to succeed to screw anybody and everybody that he could find in Europe. He subsequently got into a lot of trouble, which I may or may not relate later on. But he got caught trying to make a move, put a move on, or go over to some late young lady's house whose husband was supposedly at work on a second shift. But she had to fess up that he had made arrangements to come over, and the old man stayed home along with the cops, and poor Joe ended up in jail. Our oldest son, Don, made a connection. I might as well cover it now because I'll forget about it later. Made a connection with Joe Danella, who worked for Prentice Hall in Rochester. And once he retired, he was just one of those energetic people that had to have something to do. So I think he placed an ad in the paper, I'll make calls for you, or get you new business. Son Don, as you'll recall, Don, called the number, talked to Joe, ironically figured out that this was Don Coon III, Don Coon Jr.'s son, and made a connection that way. I don't know whether Joe ever did any work for you, Don, but he was a go-getter. He was a go-getter, no question about it. Happily, this friend of my dad's wrote this letter because I don't think there was anything outstanding about my academic, athletic, or any other abilities, and probably never would have seen the light of day at SAE, at the SAE house, had it not been for this friend of my dad's letter introducing me. When I did pledge in my early sophomore year to SAE, there was a typical pledge requirements of washing people's cars and keeping the fraternity house clean and various other demeaning type of things, but no paddling per se. The SAE house was at 610 South Main Street in Bowling Green. The house having since been sold and the fraternity having moved on campus. But I think they got caught drinking or doing something and got their ass thrown off of campus, so I don't think they're even functional now at Bowling Green. But nevertheless, we were about a mile from school, and it was a pretty good hike. I think in my sophomore year, maybe not in September, but maybe in January, was when I moved into the fraternity house and met some awfully nice people. I like Don and Larry, and I don't think Paul's kept in touch with too many of his roommates, classmates, as Don and Larry have, but I wish I had been closer so I could have continued my relationship that I developed in college with some of the wonderful men that I met there. I will relate a story that I have told, and maybe as part when I start telling stories like this, I think this is what prompted Larry to say, "Hey, old man, put this stuff down on tape," because I can't remember it all. And I remember one time, I think it was in my sophomore year, when between the campus and the SAE house, there were a number of bars, obviously, just like in Oswego. And one of the bars was named Unkert's. Well, on one Friday afternoon in the fall, still warm, still bright sunshine, I think finishing classes at noon or 1 o'clock or somewhere in that vicinity, a number of us said, well, why don't we stop at Unkert's on the way back from campus to the house? And we did. Well, as a 18-year-old or 19-year-old at home, I had gone to bars, I had had a few pops, and it was usually dark when I exited the bar. Well, if you go into a bar at 1 o'clock, there's just so much beer you can drink, contrary to what Don might tell you. And I think I exited the bar at 3 or 4 or 5 or what, somewhere in that vicinity. And I walked out, and when you got a buzz on, and you walk out into sunshine, when you're accustomed to walking out onto the street from a bar, in the dark you can handle it. When you walk out in sunshine and the sun is beating down in your face and your eyes, and they're not too well focused to begin with, it was quite an experience. And that was the first experience I ever had of having half a buzz on, or a buzz on, and walking out into the sunshine. I've never liked to do that subsequently. I don't think it would bother Don at all. Would it, Don? And I never got up and ran the next morning, Don, like you do, or went swimming. So I was never able to get all that confounded poison out of my system the next morning. I do believe that between my freshman and junior year, when I knew I was going to move into the fraternity house, and it may have been between my sophomore and junior year, but I think it was as I was going back to school as a sophomore, knowing that I was going to join the fraternity, knowing I was going to be a mile from campus, that my dad said one evening, "Come on, Don, let's go over and see Uncle Ray." Uncle Ray Blandford lived over on Stillwell right near Colvin, as I have mentioned earlier. And we went over there, and there, sitting in his driveway, was a 1936 Plymouth Coupe. And we chatted with Ray for a while with some of the pleasantries of friends and neighbors and relatives. And Ray said, "Geez, that's a nice car there." Gave Dad the keys. Dad gave them to me, said, "Don, why don't you get in the car?" So I got in the car, I started it up, and God bless my parents. They said, "God bless you, and take it back to college with you." Well, you could have knocked me over with a feather. I hadn't asked for, didn't expect, didn't think they could afford any kind of wheels for me. The only problem that that car had was that it burned oil like gangbusters. And it didn't take me long to figure out that what I ought to do is have a 5-gallon container, drum, bucket full of oil, because about every 100 miles